You want to talk to God? Let's go see him together. I've got nothing better to do.
Lindy, come back home now!
Raiders of the Lost Ark is the film that redefined what an action movie could be. A throwback to 1930s adventure serials that somehow felt more alive than anything Hollywood had made in years. But the version you saw nearly had a different hero, a different director, and one of its most iconic moments almost never happened. Today we're uncovering 14 hidden truths about Raiders of the Lost Ark 1981. 1. Indiana Jones got his name from George Lucas's dog. The character's real name, Henry Jones Jr., barely matters in the films. He goes by Indiana, and that name came directly from George Lucas's Alaskan Malamute, a dog also named Indiana. Lucas had originally called the character Indiana Smith. Spielberg didn't like it. Both men agreed the surname needed to change, and Indiana Jones became the version they went with.
What's his name?
In The Last Crusade, Sean Connery's Henry Jones Sr. confirms the joke, telling his son he got the name from the family dog. The fictional dog naming gag became canon. Lucas's actual dog, who inspired the entire name, never made it on screen. But the Star Wars creator's Alaskan Malamute is the reason one of cinema's most recognized heroes carries the name he does. 2. Tom Selleck was Indiana Jones until CBS stopped him. Harrison Ford was not the first choice for Indy. Multiple actors were considered, including Nick Nolte, Jeff Bridges, Bill Murray, and Steve Martin. The casting directors eventually landed on Tom Selleck after a screen test that convinced both Lucas and Spielberg he was their man. Selleck signed on. Then CBS greenlit Magnum P.I. Selleck was contractually obligated to the show if it went to series. Lucas and Spielberg went to CBS and asked the network to release him 10 days early from the pilot shoot.
Tom Selleck and Sean Young, and it was really, really good.
CBS, realizing they had a star on their hands, refused and greenlit the show specifically to keep him locked in. Spielberg saw Harrison Ford on screen in The Empire Strikes Back and pushed for him despite Lucas's reluctance to use his Star Wars lead twice. Ford got the role. Selleck spent 8 years in Hawaii. The irony is that a 1980 actors' strike later paused Magnum P1, which would have given Selleck just enough time to make Raiders. The timing missed by weeks. 3. Every major studio turned the film down before Paramount said yes. George Lucas conceived the character and the broad story outline in the early 1970s. By the time he was ready to bring it to studios, he had Star Wars behind him and enough leverage to get meetings anywhere in Hollywood. It didn't matter. Every major studio passed. The $20 million budget was considered too high for what the project was being described as an homage to old adventure serials set in the 1930s starring a whip-carrying archaeologist. Studios didn't see how it would work commercially. The pitch kept getting rejected. Paramount finally took the gamble. In retrospect, the rejection from every other studio became one of the more embarrassing chains of decisions in Hollywood history. Raiders earned $354 million worldwide. It was the highest-grossing film of 1981. The studios that passed watched Paramount cash in while they tried to explain their thinking. 4. Spielberg had been burned 3 times and needed a hit badly. By the time Raiders went into production in 1980, Steven Spielberg had 3 consecutive brutal experiences behind him. Jaws went wildly over budget and schedule. Close Encounters of the Third Kind was a commercial success, but an exhausting production. And 1941, his 1979 war comedy, was both a box office disappointment and a critical disaster. Spielberg agreed to direct Raiders partly because he needed a fast, clean win. He told Lucas he would only take the job if they could do it quickly and stay on budget, specifically because he couldn't survive another 1941. He came prepared. Every major set piece was planned and blocked using scale miniatures and models before filming began. It allowed the production to average 35 setups a day on location in Tunisia. Raiders came in under its final intended budget and ahead of schedule. After delivering the film, Lucas told the studio simply, "If you hire the greatest director in the world, making movies is easy." 5. Over 150 crew members got dysentery in Tunisia, and it created the most iconic scene in the film. Filming in Tunisia was brutal. Temperatures regularly hit over 130 degrees Fahrenheit. The water supply was unreliable. The local food took down over 150 members of the production crew. with amoebic dysentery. Harrison Ford was among them. Spielberg survived by bringing 120 cans of food from England and eating cold out of a can for the entire location shoots. The planned sequence for that section of the film was a 3.5-page scripted whip versus sword fight, what Spielberg described as the most definitive whip against sword fight ever conceived. It was going to take 2 to 3 days to shoot. Ford was too sick to be out of his trailer for more than 10 minutes. At a time, Ford suggested to Spielberg that Indy just shoot the swordsman, one take, done. Terry Richards, the stuntman who had spent weeks training with a scimitar for the extended fight, watched his entire role disappear in a single camera setup. The scene got a bigger laugh than any scripted moment in the film. 6! The film needed 10,000 snakes and ran out of real ones. The Well of Souls sequence required enough snakes to carpet the floor of an enormous underground chamber. Spielberg started by ordering 3,000 snakes from pet shops and suppliers across London and the south of England. When they were laid out on the set, 3,000 didn't come close to covering the floor. Another 7,000 were sourced from every garden center and pet shop the production team could reach. 10,000 snakes total. Then, when the snakes kept clustering and wouldn't fill the space evenly, the crew added rubber hoses cut to snake length and dropped them into the gaps. Close inspection of the final footage reveals some of the hoses if you know what to look for. There was also a shortage of anti-venom on the Elstree Studios lot. A python bit the first assistant director David Tomblin's hand during filming and wouldn't release. Tomblin calmly asked a crew member to grab the snake by the tail and whip it, sending a wave through its body that forced the bite open. He then went and had it looked at. 7. Harrison Ford performed most of his own stunts and got hurt doing it. Ford insisted on doing as much physical work himself as the production would allow. Spielberg frequently called him an idiot for it and used him anyway because the shots looked better with Ford's face visible. During the flying wing sequence in Tunisia, where Jones fights a massive German mechanic underneath a spinning aircraft, a vehicle rolled directly over Ford's foot and toward his knee before it was stopped. It took 40 crew members to shift it off him. Ford avoided serious injury only because the extreme heat had softened the tire and the ground was covered in sand. The same scene required the production's stunt coordinator Frank Marshall, not a trained stuntman, to serve as the flying wing pilot because dysentery had left the production short of available stunt doubles. Marshall had never piloted a plane. He sat in the cockpit while Ford fought underneath the spinning propellers. 8. The opening Paramount logo dissolving into a mountain was Spielberg's childhood dream. The iconic opening of Raiders, the Paramount Mountain logo fading into a real mountain in Hawaii, wasn't a studio decision. It was something Spielberg had wanted to do since he was a child making home movies. He had set up his own make-believe production company called Playmount as a kid, partly named after Paramount, and had always pictured the logo becoming a real landscape. When Raiders went into production, Spielberg sent producer Frank Marshall to Hawaii with instructions to find a mountain that matched the Paramount logo as closely as possible. Marshall drove around the island for several hours taking photographs. He found Kalalea Mountain on the island of Kauai. Spielberg used the 1940s version of the Paramount logo rather than the 1981 version, a deliberate choice to anchor the film in the era it was paying tribute to. The film begins before a single line of dialogue with Spielberg quietly telling the audience what kind of movie this is going to be. 9. Danny DeVito almost played Sallah before John Rhys Davies was cast as Sallah, Indy's boisterous Egyptian friend. The role was offered to Danny DeVito. DeVito was interested. The problem was his agent demanded more money than the production was willing to pay, and DeVito had scheduling conflicts with his role on the sitcom Taxi. The offer fell through. Rhys Davies, a classically trained Welsh actor with a big physical presence and a booming voice, stepped in and created one of the most beloved supporting characters in the franchise. He went on to play Sallah again in The Last Crusade. Rhys Davies would later become even more recognizable to a new generation as Gimli, the dwarf in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. The Sallah role helped establish him as a reliable anchor in large-scale adventure productions, and a career path that began because Danny DeVito's agent asked for too much money. 10. The boulder, the flying wing, and the truck chase all used second unit directors. The scale of Raiders required Spielberg to delegate in ways he hadn't done before. Several of the film's most famous sequences were directed not by Spielberg himself, but by Michael Moore, the film's second unit director. Moore handled the convoy truck chase, the sequence where Indy fights his way through an entire German convoy on a desert road. He worked closely from Spielberg's detailed storyboards, but contributed several shots Spielberg later acknowledged as improvements on his own original ideas. Stuntman Glenn Randall came up with the moment where Jones drops underneath the truck and drags behind it, which Ford then performed himself. The stop-motion miniature work for cars going over cliffs, the matte painting backgrounds, and several of the wider action compositions all came from Moore's unit, operating simultaneously with Spielberg's main unit. The film was essentially two productions running in parallel across multiple locations. 11. John Williams wrote two themes at the piano, and Spielberg used both. John Williams was Spielberg's established collaborator by 1981, having already scored Jaws, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and 1941. For Raiders, Williams sat at the piano and played Spielberg two different pieces he had developed for Indiana Jones. Spielberg wanted both. The two pieces were woven together to create what became the Raiders March, the main theme that plays over Indy's heroic moments. Williams said he intended the music to be theatrical and excessive rather than serious, matching the pulpy adventure serial tone Spielberg was going for. For the Ark sequences, Williams used dark, ominous brass to represent the Nazis, drawing deliberately from 1940s film scoring conventions. The romantic theme for Marion was built to contrast against the film's humor and action. The score was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Score, but lost to Vangelis's Chariots of Fire, one of the more argued about Oscar outcomes of that era. 12. R2, D2, and C3PO are carved into the Well of Souls wall. The Well of Souls set was built at Elstree Studios in England, the same facility where the original Star Wars had been shot. The connection between the two productions runs deeper than location sharing. If you look closely at the hieroglyphics carved into the stone walls of the Well of Souls, two of the carvings are unmistakably R2D2 and C3PO. They appear in the background of a wall shot, recognizable by their shapes carved into the Egyptian-style stonework. The production designers hid them there as a tribute to the Lucasfilm that made Raiders possible. The same playful connection runs through another detail. Jock's seaplane at the start of the film carries the registration numbers OB-CPO, a reference to Obi-Wan Kenobi and C-3PO. The two franchises are quietly saluting each other in the background of almost every major scene. 13. Pre-release polls showed no audience interest, then it became the year's biggest film. In the weeks before Raiders opened, Paramount commissioned audience polling to gauge interest. The results were discouraging. Pre-release surveys showed low enthusiasm for the film, especially compared to Superman 2, which was opening around the same time and tracking strongly. Paramount was not optimistic. The film opened on June 12, 1981, in just over 1,000 theaters. It earned $8.3 million its opening weekend, solid but not explosive. Then it held and held again. A film that was supposed to peak and fade instead barely declined week to week. 6 months after its release, industry executives were joking that Raiders would be the big Christmas movie. It officially left theaters in March 1982, 9 months after opening. By that point, it had earned $212 million domestically and $354 million worldwide, making it the highest-grossing film of the year. The polls that predicted indifference were wrong about nearly every single audience that ever sat down to watch it. 14. The sound of the rolling boulder is a Honda Civic on a gravel hill. Sound effects supervisor Ben Bird approached Raiders the same way he had approached Star Wars, by recording nothing from libraries and building every sound from scratch with unexpected sources. The iconic rumble of the boulder rolling through the Peruvian temple was recorded by driving a Honda Civic down a gravel hill. The snake slithering sounds were created by Bert running his hands through a bowl of cheese casserole and dragging wet sponges across grip tape. The roar of the engine on the German convoy truck was enhanced by mixing in a recorded lion's roar, which is why the truck feels like a living, hostile thing bearing down on Indy rather than just a vehicle. The opening and closing of the Ark was recorded using a toilet cistern being lifted and replaced. The sound of branding flesh came from a sizzling microphone placed near heat. Burt won a Special Achievement Award at the Academy Awards for his work. Every terrifying noise in Raiders was something completely ordinary in disguise. Raiders asked one question and answered it for good. What does the perfect adventure movie feel like? It still hasn't been topped. What's your favorite scene in the film? And do you think anything since has come close? Drop your answer in the comments, and if this one took you back, subscribe. There's plenty more buried treasure waiting.